The city woke to the sound of chains. They had rung long after the crowd dispersed, long after Ilya's gauntlet dimmed and Mael's faithful drifted like soot down side corridors. The iron choir's voice traveled through ductwork and tram spines and stairwells, a low tremor that made mugs chatter on shelves and sleeping bodies turn toward the wall. What any one person heard depended on what they had carried home. To the cult it was an amen, to the gangs, an auction bell, to the guild, a siren they could not locate on any diagram, to those who had never stood in that hall, simply a rumor their bones tried to believe. Jarek did not sleep. The 7 rings inside him were still vibrating, their scrape turned to a harsh purr. Every time he closed his eyes he saw the great lengths of iron bow and answer his chains as if they were cousins separated by bad years. And under that, the hunger paced. Not laughing now. Not coaxing. Measuring. Twice, you refused to eat what would have made you whole, it said at last, in the quiet that follows storms. That makes a shape too. I am not the only thing that learns you. He lay on his back and watched the lamp's soot blue flame. Then learn it, he said. I'm not changing the answer. The hunger did not sulk. It does not waste time that way. We will see what your answers cost you when other hands write the question, it said, and went to sit in the doorway of his thoughts like a dog no one admits they feed. At dawn Varric poured water and oil the way a man starts the day by naming what he can control. His crimson eye clicked a metronome under the pan's pop. We cannot stay still, he said without looking over. Staying still after making that much noise invites choreography. Who wrote the piece? Jarek asked, and then realized it didn't matter. The answer would be everyone. The square bore marks of the night the way a face bears worry hard to describe, easy to see. Someone had chalked chain links along the fountain. Someone else had rubbed them out with his boot heel until the drawing looked like water. A preacher had lost his crate and found a smaller one, his voice had grown to fill the lack. The pear seller had tied her hair back with copper wire and was arguing with a man who insisted the price of pears must respond to the price of nails because everything was metal now. She saw Jarek and lifted her chin in greeting that pretended not to be relief. You left without buying, she scolded, which is how some people say I worried and then decided not to. I sang, he said, and regretted it as soon as the joke left his mouth. You made a room hold its breath, she corrected briskly. And the ones who like their voices loudest hate that trick. She made a face toward the far end of the square. See. 3 men had climbed onto the broken rail and were trying to reenact Ilya's posture with less grace and more knives. He showed the way, one crowed. We don't wait for doors. We make them. We eat. You will try, the pear seller muttered, and the rest of us will drown cleaning up the trying. She slid a small knife across her board to Jarek. Hold this for me while you remember you have hands. He took it. The blade had been sharpened so often it had learned to be honest about how little steel it had left. He liked it immediately. He set it down again because liking isn't ownership and the knife knew where it lived. They did not reach the vent shafts before the first echo of Ilya's influence arrived on a stretcher of smoke, a seam opening where seams rarely came, in the crosshatch between 2 stalls, as if demonstrating a point. It was small, the kind of wound a city shrugs off. 5 men and a woman had already crowded it, throwing scraps toward the black light as though feeding a pet. Step back, Varric called, and for once the words did not have to be a command. The seam pulsed harder at attention, like a dog deciding whether to bite a stranger or its owner. Jarek stepped in and laid his band on the stone. He didn't summon chains yet. He breathed. The rings inside him hummed to the basin's remembered pulse. The door tried to widen and then remembered something about the shape of no, about a hand on its crown pushing it gently back. When the chain flash came, it came small and neat, and the soul it offered was barely a cupful. The hunger yawned. You see? Even the city will bring you crumbs now to see if you will beg. He shaped the smallness into a thread around the band and let the door seal. One of the men muttered that he could have done it faster by kicking. The woman cuffed him. Varric said nothing. He didn't have to. When you do the right thing with enough steadiness in public, some conversations stop needing your voice. Across the square, the other echo was uglier. A gang lieutenant had decided to make a door theatrically. He had a kettledrum salvaged from the rust works and he was beating it with a rivet, laughing between strikes, and if the hall had any mercy it would have mocked him with silence. Of course it did not. On the fifth strike the drum head split with a wet scream. The rivet buried itself in someone's stall. Black fire licked along the tier. A seam opened, not large, but mean, the size of a mouth held too tight for too long. Out oozed something like a hand grafted to a snake, or a snake that had learned envy. The lieutenant froze because fear is often late to the bravado party, and the thing rapped him twice and asked for rent. Jarek moved before anyone decided this was spectacle. Chains burst and hissed. He didn't draw. He rubbed. The wrongness pulled away like paint washed with a clean rag until the door realized there was nothing worth walking into and shut itself with an embarrassed cough. The lieutenant fell, missing a chunk of pride and some skin. The gangs watched with the looks of men calculating whether a lesson ruins a trend. One spat. Another spat too. The third, older, didn't. He touched his brow and then his throat in a way that belonged to none of the Undercity's current religions. Jarek filed that away. Today, Varric said as they walked, we argue with echoes. Tomorrow, with men who enjoyed the sound so much they hire singers. They already have a singer, Jarek said. He meant Ilya. He did not have to say it. The thought of him was enough to bend air. Voss found them at noon, not because she had been looking but because their orbits were now linked by duty and refusal. She did not bring a wedge. She brought a map rolled tight enough to be a baton. Ilya walked the choir like a ledger, she said, unrolling it against a wall. The parchment was stained by rain and oil and 6 kinds of human handling. He's marked 3 halls. 2 are mine to hold. 1 is not. She tapped a block of stone drawn darker than the rest, the long span, an old overpass still clotted with dead machines. Doors like to test the span, she said. It gives them height to fall from and sound to love when they do. We keep it quiet by accident, too many scrappers and too few ropes. Ilya will like the stage and the way a fall looks from it. Time? Varric asked. Soon, she said. Too soon for my better men to get there by the legal stairs. She looked at Jarek. There's a quicker road, but it was bricked when the city decided not to need it. Can you unneed a brick? Only if the brick is listening, he said. Then speak, she said, and didn't bother pretending she hadn't rehearsed asking. The Undercity's quick roads rarely wore signs, they were the places where sound had learned to turn corners. Varric led through a tangle of narrow runs that smelled like a dictionary might if left in a drain for a winter. Twice they passed chalk rings hurry-drawn and unlovely that still hummed because fear had thick wrists. Once a door tried to start itself like a bad engine and Jarek set his band against the wall and told it a story about how quiet had value. It listened, not because the story was good but because the teller believed it. They found the brick where the city had once killed a staircase. It was gritty with 100 new hands. Voss set her palm to it and spoke the kind of order that sounds like a prayer when nothing else works. Move, she said. The brick did not, because brick rarely respects poetry. Jarek set his band to the mortar and breathed until his ribs gave him permission to not think of anything else. The 7 rings aligned enough to hum the right note, the basin quietly echoed. He did not call gold. He called patience. When he pushed, the mortar crumbled like bread that had been held too long. Varric pried. Voss lifted. The staircase decided to be a staircase again. From the top step the span looked like a spine that had learned to lay above ground. Beams like ribs. Machines like scabs. Chains slung from old cranes that had rusted into static gestures pointing at a sky the Undercity pretended not to believe in. People dotted the arc, scrappers with hooks, runners with the kind of shoes that add speed to bad ideas, and near the crown, the faithful ringed around a man whose gauntlet glowed pale like a sterile sun. Ilya did not shout to be heard. He lifted the gauntlet and the span listened because metal has always envied the certainty of numbers. The chains trembled. A seam widened between two beams as if the bridge itself were unzipping its old skin. If this story has you listening this far, subscribe to Azure Inkblade so the next chapter finds you instead of getting buried. It helps us keep making more of these every week. Now, back to the chapter. Stop, Voss said to the air. And to him. Ilya smiled the way a man smiles when a child suggests a new rule mid-game. Captain, he called down without looking, you are welcome to write a report about what you watched me save you from. He turned his eyes to Jarek. Brother. Come stand where we can both be visible in our choices. Varric's knife moved into the kind of angle that counts as optimism for him. He likes height, he murmured. He thinks it's proof he was taller all along. Jarek walked the beam toward Ilya because if he stayed under the arc it would be a different kind of stage with worse lighting. The scrappers parted. Some touched his sleeve. Some flinched. One of Mael's acolytes leaned far enough over the lip to make three men swear and then called it lack of faith when they dragged him back. Up close, the seam Ilya was tending looked like a zipper frozen halfway, teeth brighter than they had any right to be. Something pressed behind it too large, too many-edged, like a room emptying itself through a keyhole. The gauntlet stitched light along the edge, pushing the wrong shine into a grid. You're netting the door, Jarek said. I'm holding it accountable, Ilya said mildly. Measure keeps men honest. Why not fire? Because it isn't a man, Jarek said. Everything becomes a man if you give it a choice between crown and chain. Ilya's gaze flicked to the band on Jarek's wrist. You keep making bracelets where you could make scepters. That was charming once. It will kill others now. You made a hall eat itself to prove a rhyme, Jarek said. That will kill others sooner. Then let us kill different others, Ilya said, patient. He gestured with his free hand, not the gauntleted one, the soft one that still remembered letters. Stand with me and we can say no to the correct things. With teeth. The guild will measure for us, the cult will kneel in the right direction, the gangs will run errands like dogs that have discovered a leash is better than being kicked. Varric's breath slid between his teeth behind Jarek. Voss's wedge assembled in pragmatic squares at the span's foot. Mael's people murmured at the edges like a sea deciding whether it was weather. The seam bulged. The bridge groaned. Chains overhead began to hum to themselves. Choose, Ilya said, and the word was not a roar. It was worse, a kindness offered in the wrong room. Jarek set his palm against the stitch of light and felt the net's song. It was a pretty one, too clean, the sort of melody a child hums while drawing straight lines on paper that will never have to hold a roof. Under it, the true sound, pressure, heat, mischief. If the door opened here it would dump the beast onto men who had spent more years with hooks than with knives. Scrappers would die first and be blamed for the mess because that is what scrappers are for in stories written by hands that stay clean. He raised his band and slid it under the net. Ilya's brows lifted. That won't hold this, he said, amused. You know it? It isn't for holding, Jarek said. It's for asking to be held. He breathed 7. The band warmed. The basin's cold answered from a place it had no right